I want you to try something. Just for a second, picture a metaphor with me.
Oh.
Imagine a child born in, say, the industrial heat of Detroit.
Mm.
You know, you can feel the humidity, the assembly lines, that soul. But then, almost right away, that child gets whisked across the Atlantic.
Right.
And is raised in the damp, gray, kind of concrete world of the United Kingdom.
That's a powerful image. A little bleak, but I get it.
Right. Well, that child, that's techno music. And that's the core idea we're exploring today.
Mm.
We're doing a deep dive into this really fantastic column by MMR from July 2025. It's called The Golden Age of UK Techno.
It's a fascinating piece of writing. It really is.
It totally is. And it basically lays out how the UK in the 90s took these, these electronic blueprints from Detroit and just mutated them.
Mutated is the perfect word.
Wasn't a copy. It became something darker, harder, and, well, maybe more intellectually complex.
And we're not just talking about a genre, are we? The source frames this whole period as, like, the morning after the big party.
The party being the second summer of love in '88.
Exactly. You know, the late 80s in the UK, that was all acid house. It was smiley faces, euphoria, everyone hugging in a field somewhere.
Right.
But this deep dive, it picks up right after that, the early 90s. And all that optimism is, well, it's starting to fade. The whole rave scene gets pushed underground, and the sound changes to match a much grimmer reality.
It's interesting you say grim because the column almost paints this new techno as a kind of survival tool. It wasn't about escaping anymore.
No, not at all. And that's the first really big idea here. To get the music, you have to get the context. We're at the very end of the Thatcher years, moving into the John Major government.
Okay.
And the UK is dealing with this huge economic gap. Unemployment's rising. And there's this feeling, especially among young people, that the door to the future has just been slammed in their face.
So if the 80s were all about aspiration and, load some money, this 90s sound was the total opposite.
It was a reaction to the rust. That's the phrase the author uses, revolution and rust.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. You have these huge industrial cities, especially in the North and the Midlands, and they're just decaying. The factories are closing down. And the kids took the tools of electronic music, the samplers and drum machines, and used them to reflect that decay right back at society.
That sounds incredibly aggressive.
It was aggressive, but it was focused. The source actually calls it a social movement that was just disguised as dance music.
Wow.
And while the scene sort of broke apart into different sounds, you had hardcore, you had breakbeat, the techno strain specifically became this weaponized sound.
Weaponized sound. Okay, let's get into what that actually sounded like, because the source breaks this down by city, which I found super helpful.
Yeah.
Birmingham versus Sheffield.
The body and the head.
Exactly. Let's start with the body. Birmingham.
Right. Birmingham is, it's historically the city of 1,000 trades. It's got this incredibly heavy industrial past, metal, manufacturing.
You can feel it in the architecture.
Yeah, you can. And so the techno that came out of there, the Birmingham sound, is described in the text as industrial, solid, and dystopian.
When they say solid, what does that mean to my ears? If I'm not a music producer, what am I hearing that's different from, say, a pop song?
Think of a concrete loop. It's just stripped bare. We're talking four beats that are brutally repetitive, almost no melody.
Relentless.
Totally relentless. It's a loop that doesn't go anywhere. It just hammers you. And the text points to a label called Downwards as being the kind of ground zero for this.
Downwards. I mean, the name itself tells you something. It's not Look on the Bright Side Records.
No, definitely not. Downwards was started by an artist called Regis, and the aesthetic is described as ascetic.
Ascetic, like a monk.
Yeah, a monk who lives in a steel factory. It pulls a lot from EBM electronic body music and old industrial music. The whole point was to strip everything away.
No frills.
Zero frills. No vocals, no happy chords, just the raw physical power of the rhythm. It's functional music for a hard place.
And the source really spotlights one artist who kind of embodies all of this.
Surgeon.
Anthony Child, yeah, surgeon. He's absolutely central to this whole story. His stuff is the definition of that Birmingham sound. It's hard, it's precise.
And the source mentions his debut album from '96, Communications.
Mm-hmm.
And it notes that Jeff Mills supported that record. Why is that specific detail so important?
Oh, it's crucial. Because Jeff Mills, I mean, he's one of the founding fathers of Detroit Techno. He is absolute royalty.
Right.
For him to play Surgeon's music in his sets, that was Detroit basically looking at Birmingham and nodding, saying, we see you. You get it. It was validation. It meant the UK mutation was a worthy successor, not just some cheap copy.
There's a track mentioned, Dry, from 1999. Even that title, Dry, just sums up the whole feel. It's not lush, it's not fluid, it's friction.
It is. It's just hard, minimal grooves. It's about the texture of the sound, not the notes. It's meant to be felt physically in a dark room with one strobe light. It creates this tension. Okay, so that's Birmingham, the industrial sledgehammer, the body. But if we go north to Sheffield, the source says we find a totally different kind of mutation, the head.
Yeah, Sheffield is where we get the so-called intelligent mutation. And the womb for that style is a label that, for a certain generation, is probably the most famous electronic label on Earth, Warp Records.
Warp is a legend. But before all the super complex stuff, the source says they started with Bleep Techno. Can you define that? It sounds a bit cute.
It wasn't cute, but it was bouncy. Think of tracks like LFO by LFO or the early Nightmares on Wax stuff. It was this weird mix of really heavy dub reggae style bass lines like earth-shaking bass with these very sharp high-pitched synthesizer bleeps on top.
So catchy but strange.
Catchy, rude, and weird, yeah. But then Warp evolves into the home of IDM intelligent dance music.
I gotta say, I've always had a problem with that term. It sounds so elitist, right? Like, oh, your music is dumb, but I listen to intelligent music.
It's a hugely controversial term. The text even admits that. The artists themselves hated it. But what it's trying to describe is a shift in purpose. This was music using the tools of techno, but arranging them in ways you often couldn't dance to.
So it's not for the club.
It's for your headphones, for your living room, or maybe for, sitting in the back of the club just nodding your head.
Right.
The source holds up a group called the Black Dog as pioneers. Their album Bites from '93 is a key text here. They took those classic Detroit chords, which are usually really soulful, and they just twisted them into these complex, constantly shifting patterns. It was a journey, not a loop.
And the absolute peak of this, according to the column, is Autechre.
Autechre is the deep end of the pool. If you jump in there, you might never touch the bottom.
Ah.
Their work, albums like Incunabula or Amber, the source just calls it experimental sound design. They weren't making tracks so much as they were breaking the grid.
What do you mean breaking the grid? What does that sound like?
Yes. Well, most dance music is on a rigid grid, right? Kick, snare, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's predictable, so your body knows what to do. Autechre would program the machines to glitch and stutter, to play in time signatures that felt completely alien. It was about the philosophy of the sound itself.
So if Birmingham was the factory floor,
Sheffield was the computer network.
it seems like such a clean split. Body versus head, muscle versus brain. But it couldn't have been that simple, could it? Were there people bridging that gap?
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't two camps at war or anything. There were connectors. And the most important one that our text mentions is Luke Slater,
Also known as Planetary Assault Systems.
which is just one of the greatest names in all of music history.
It sounds like a 90s video game.
It does. But Slater's so important because he just refused to pick a side. His style is described in the source as hard but funky.
Funky. Now that is a word we have not used yet.
And it's the key ingredient. Birmingham techno could be very, rigid. Sheffield stuff could be really abstract. Slater brought the groove, the swing. He made techno that was hard enough for a Birmingham warehouse, but it had these complex production details that the IDM listeners would respect.
And his album Freak Funk from '97 is held up as the prime example of this.
It's the perfect middle ground. And Slater was also crucial because of the labels he worked with, like Nova Mute and Peace Frog.
Peace Frog is interesting. The text says they were keeping the connection to the motherland alive.
Exactly. Peace Frog was a UK label, but they were licensing and releasing music straight from Detroit artists, people like Stacey Pullen. So they kept that dialogue going between the American originators and the UK mutators.
The channel.
A vital channel. And Nova Mute, being part of this huge label, Mute Records, helped export this very British sound to the rest of Europe. They really took the movement global.
I want to shift gears a little bit because we've covered the sound, the cities, the artists. But there's a whole section in this source called The Politics of Space that really got me thinking. It argues that you can't understand this music just by listening to it. You have to understand where it was being played.
I would say this is probably the most important point in the whole article. This was not club music in the way we think of it now, with tickets and bouncers and overpriced drinks.
This is illegal.
Deeply illegal. And the place itself was a political statement. We're talking about disused warehouses, open fields, the ruins of old factories.
And the source mentions groups like Spiral Tribe.
Spiral Tribe are the ultimate example. They were a free party crew. Literally a convoy of old trucks, painted black, just loaded down with massive sound systems. They were modern nomads. They'd drive around the country, find some marginalized, forgotten space, break in, set up the speakers, and just blast this brutal techno all weekend.
The source says this was about shaking the existing social order. So it wasn't just a party, it was an occupation.
It was an occupation, absolutely.
Oh.
I mean, think about space in the UK. It is so regulated, so privately owned. Land rights go back centuries.
Right.
By taking over a warehouse, they were reclaiming that space. They were creating what some people call a temporary autonomous zone.
A temporary autonomous zone, a place where the normal rules just don't apply.
For a weekend or a night, the laws of the state stopped at the edge of the sound system's reach. The only law was the rhythm. And that hard, aggressive sound we talked about, that was the fuel. It was physically loud enough to push the outside world away.
That completely reframes the aggression we were talking about. It wasn't about violence, it was a force field.
It was an assertion of existence, and that's exactly why the authorities came down on it so hard with the Criminal Justice Bill in 1994. They weren't scared of the music itself. They were scared of people gathering and creating their own rules outside of sanctioned commercial spaces. It was a direct threat to property.
So, as we look back on this golden age now, I mean, the party did end. The laws passed, superclubs opened up, techno became a global business.
Yeah.
What's the lasting legacy of that very specific time and place?
The scene definitely changed, but the source argues that its DNA is permanent. The big takeaway is that 90s UK techno proved that electronic music could be more than just disposable party fuel. It could pursue radical possibilities.
It resisted just selling out.
For a while, yeah. And you still hear it today. When you listen to modern industrial techno or noise music or even experimental film scores, think of the sound of Chernobyl or Dune. That dark, textural, dystopian sound comes directly from the warehouses of Birmingham and the studios of Sheffield.
There's a quote near the end of the column that I think is just perfect. It says, "This music wasn't played just to dance, but to assert existence."
That's it. That's the heart of it. I make noise, therefore I am. In a country that's telling you you're redundant because your factory is closed, making a machine scream is a way of proving that you're still here, you still exist.
The text leaves us with this incredible final image of the iron coal beats and fog-like melancholy echoing through Sheffield factories and Birmingham warehouses. It calls it the soul of the machine.
It's a reminder that technology is always just a mirror, isn't it? Even those cold, brutalist 90s machines, they were just reflecting the very deep, very human feelings of the people who were programming them.
Which brings us to the question I kind of want to leave you with today. We now live in a world that's hyper-digital, hyper-regulated. Music is everywhere, right? It's on your phone, in the cloud, it's instant. But do we still have the spaces?
That's the million-dollar question. We have the data streams, but do we have the autonomy?
In a world where every square foot of land is mapped and monitored and owned, where do you go to challenge the social order with sound today? Has that rebellion moved completely online? Or is there still a need for a cold room and a speaker stack to feel truly free?
I'd argue the internet can't replicate the feeling of a kick drum physically vibrating in your chest. We might need those warehouses now more than ever.
If you find one, let us know. But maybe don't post the location online. Thanks for listening to this deep dive.
Keep listening.